So today, I want to talk about music analysis for beginners, because I love music analysis. For those of you who don't know, I'm 8-Bit Music Theory. I run a YouTube channel where I do music analysis on video game music, take them apart, figure out what makes the songs work, try and break them down into different ideas, try and figure out what the composer was thinking. And I find it extremely fun and extremely fulfilling and extremely educational as a musician and a composer as well, extremely helpful. But I realize that it can be kind of a hard thing to break into, and people might not know where to start. And so this panel is for you, if that's you. So why analyze music? I already talked about this a little bit, but analyzing music, like analyzing any form of art, I think is primarily to make you better at that form of art. So you can improve your composition and arranging and performing skill and your general understanding of how music works. You can analyze one composer or one genre to try and figure out what specifically makes this composer sound like this composer, What makes Uematsu such a great game composer, right? By analyzing all of his works, you can figure out what sets him apart from other composers. And, we all need a hobby. It fills the days. So that's another reason. Now, to get started, I guess I'll talk about a little bit about what analysis is, like, fundamentally. To get started, I think you need to know a baseline of music theory, but I think it's less music theory than you would assume. You don't need to know what a mode is necessarily. You don't need to know what a sharp 11, flat 13 chord is, but you do need to know what a key is. That's the most important thing. Well, how many people here would say they don't really know what a key is, or they're kind of fuzzy on what that means? No, okay, one person, two people. Okay, so a couple people. Probably more people who are too embarrassed to put up their hand, but you shouldn't be embarrassed. A key, just like the idea that a song's in a key, and there's one note that feels resolved, that feels like home, that kind of brings everything together. So if you're in the key of C, that's C. Now, even in the key of C, you can play some pretty out there stuff, like but it comes back home to C at the end, That's the important part. So knowing that, well, I put down 3 points here, I should read off those. So that idea of a key and a key center and one note kind of being the center of whatever key you're in, whether it's C or A or B flat minor or whatever key you're in, that is applicable melodically and harmonically. So a scale degree just means that you can number each note in a scale, major or minor scale. So say you're in the key of F. This example here is in the key of F. Can anyone tell me what song this is just from looking at it? Pop quiz. I'll reveal all at the end. No, so this is in the key of F, which means F. Here's some people singing. In the key of F, the note F is going to be number 1. That's the number, because it's the home, it's the root, it's the tonic. There's a bunch of different names for it, but it's the center of everything that's going on.
Oh.
So if we have the root F,
yeah, I know what it's meant.
And we go up a step to G, that's 2. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. So there's 7 notes in a key, and then there are 5 notes outside of every key. Like if you think about on a keyboard, you have a C major scale, C major key, it's all the white notes, right? And there are only 5 black notes. 5 different black notes that repeat, right? So in any key, there's only 5 notes that won't fit. And so in F, if you go play a G flat, that's a flat 2. Because G belongs in the key, so it's 1, 2, and G flat doesn't, right? So 1, flat 2, it's the altered version. Anyway, so using this idea, you can take a melody and label all the notes with the numbers that they are. So 3, 1, 5, 6, 1, 1 is, right? Why bother putting all these numbers on these notes, right? You have the notes, why go through the trouble? It's because 3, 1, 5, 6, 1, 1 sounds the same in F as it does in A. Doesn't matter, as long as it's relative to the key. So if you play like, that's the same melody, right? You can recognize it. And it's in a different key, so the note names are different, the key signatures are different, but it's the numbers allow it to be universally analytically useful. Excuse me. Which we're going to see an example of this in a second. But first, I also want to talk about one other thing that you need to know. This is like the very basics. Oh, you can also use scale degrees relative to the underlying chord. So say you're playing a song, and the chord progression is F to E minor. A C note over the F is going to be the 5th. Because if you walk up from F, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a C. But a C over the E minor is going to be the flat 6th. Because if you walk up from E in the key of E minor, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Same note, but it sounds very different over F. Gross. Wonderful. Wow. Stop it. Okay. So this is where you hear like sharp 11, flat 13, all those crazy numbers. It's the name of a color that you can put on a chord. So the 6th over F sounds the same as the 6th over B, just it's transposed or whatever, right? So we'll get to why that's important too. So the other thing that you need to convert into numbers is the harmony. So the chord progression of a piece works very much the same way. The same way that 1 in a key is the root of the key, the 1 chord in a key is the root chord. So say we're in F, well actually say we're in E flat. This example I have up is an E flat, and the chords are A flat, B flat, E flat. Nice. Again, if you walk up E flat, F, G, A flat, that's number 4. It's the 4th note, and you build a chord off that, it becomes the 4 chord. Does that make sense? I don't want to how many of you have heard about this stuff before in Roman numeral analysis? Okay. I never know. I don't want to rush through something if everyone's at the beginning of their musical journey. But I also don't want to sit here and tell you something you already know forever. So we're going to kind of move on. But why this is important is because it allows us to identify stock chord progressions. So like I just played a 4-5-1. I played a 4-5-1 in the key of E flat, but you can put that in any key. Sounds the same as these are different keys, but it's the same progression, and it's identifiable. I have a couple examples here. Say flat 6, flat 7, 1 is really common in video game music. You get that juicy major 4 to minor 4 to 1 you've probably heard. This stuff can be super helpful because if you train your ear to recognize these patterns, you'll start to pick them out in music that you hear. And you go, oh, that was a minor 4 to 1. I know that sound, and I have a name for it because I know the Roman numerals of the chords. You all said you already knew this. I don't know why I'm going on, but the point is, analysis is all about identifying patterns that occur across multiple pieces of music, or sometimes within one piece of music, but to understand music in general more thoroughly, we have to look across swaths of music and figure out what's the same and what's different. And if we put this note here, how does that affect the emotion? And it's a whole big puzzle, kind of. And the thing that I think is most interesting about this is it allows us to, once you've done a little bit of analysis and you kind of see like, oh, every song uses this, most songs use this, you can start to zero in on what makes a piece of music unique. Because I've analyzed a lot of music in my day. And so when I look at something and it's all 4-5-1 progressions, but then there's one, I don't know, like a flat 2 chord, it's like, oh, that's interesting. I can look at that and say, that is very cool. That's kind of the identifying musical idea in this song. And some, you have to get to a point where if you don't know what a 4-5-1 progression is, then you won't be able to do that, right? But that's a very, I don't think it's hard to, I really shouldn't say that. It is hard, but I think, that information is out there. It's not super difficult or time consuming to get to that place where you can start analyzing tunes for yourself. And I think even if you don't feel like you can, you should just start and just try and see what happens, right? So when you're looking for what makes tunes special, because I think that's the interesting part of musical analysis really, is being able to look at a tune and pick out like those cool things that tune does. And I have some cheat sheets. They're not sheets, they're just cheats. That you can use, like shortcuts. Look for chromatic notes. So if you have the music, like the sheet music in front of you, and it's in the key of C or A or whatever, you're gonna have a bunch of notes and a key signature. But if you ever have an accidental or a chromatic sharp or flat sign in the music, that's going out of key there. It's probably doing that for a reason. Like that, let's look at that, zero in on that. And then also, it can be easy to forget that music is an oral medium. Listen to the music that you're analyzing, and if you notice anything stand out to you when you're listening to it, then it's like, stop it there. What's happening there? Let me look, And at all points, I always ask myself, why would the composer have chosen to do this? Trying to reverse engineer, what was the reason? Because even a composer who knows no music theory, if they're any good, they have a reason for deliberately putting the notes that they put where they put them, right? There's always some kind of effect. Even a subtle change can make a huge effect in a piece of music. So always asking yourself, why would why is this like this and not like that? So for example, I'm going to take you through a handful of tunes that I like and I think are interesting, and we're going to kind of analyze them together and so you can see what my process would be. So first I want to talk about pattern finding, because this is kind of the most basic, but also maybe the most helpful, especially if you're new to this whole process. So the athletic theme from Yoshi's Island. First, let's listen to it and see if anything stands out. Oops. Should we listen to it again, or do you all know the tune? You've all heard it before? So right away, there are two big notes in the melody that stick out. The first one, the G sharp, which would be the sharp 2 in the key of F, which that sounds gross, right? That's bad. So then you think about, okay, well, why would that be there? And if you do a little scale degree analysis, you find that the sharp 2 is moving up to the 3. Okay, that's interesting. It sounds gross when you just sit on the sharp 2, but when you listen to the song, it didn't sound gross at all. It sounded kind of cool. So you think about maybe, do you keep that piece of info in your brain? The other interesting note is the F sharp in bar 3, right? Because it's a chromatic. That didn't sound gross either. You were listening, you were following along with the sheet music, it hit that note and it sounded cool. It didn't sound bad at all. But if you just play an F sharp in the key of F, stop it, gross. So why does that work? Well, with my level of nerdery and the amount of time that I've been doing this for, I kind of know what to look for. Melodically, there are certain shapes that you look for. So if you know your arpeggios, a lot of times a melody will outline a chord by arpeggiating, going up or down each note in the chord in order. So if you look at bar 3, you get a D chord, D triad. Those last 3 notes in the bar are just a D triad going down over top of a D7 chord. So that's, that it sounds like it would fit pretty well. Sounds great. So even in the key of F, it's like, so the melody makes sense. But then you have to think to yourself, why is there a D chord in the key of F? Well, that doesn't make sense. Well, this is where Roman numeral analysis comes in. So our first chord is F, the 1 chord. Then D7 is the dominant 6th chord, and it goes to the 2, G minor. Those of you who are skilled at pattern recognition or have taken a music theory class before, you might notice that a D7 to G minor, divorced of the surrounding music, is a 5-to-1 progression in the key of G minor. That sounds very nice. Now, by looking at this tune, now you know, okay, so that's a nice chord progression that you can put in the key of G minor, but you can not only put it in the key of G minor, you can plot that in the middle of the key of F, and it makes sense still. And then you get a nice... So really what's going on here is you have F, and you have a 5-to-1 in G minor, and then a 5-to-1 in F. So it's almost like you're dipping between the 2 keys. But as F is our home base, that's what feels like home, and then the G minor excursion feels like an excursion, which is a cool compositional tool. So that's what, this is not a unique chord progression, especially for the style that Koji Kondo was going for here, the kind of like old school jazz, ragtimey feel. The 1 dominant 6, 2, 5 is like a stock chord progression. And I know that he listened to tons of different styles of music, his whole life, but especially when he was composing a game, he would really dive in and listen to music from all over the world, all throughout history to try and figure out what kind of vibe would fit with the game. So he obviously picked kind of an old school ragtimey feel for this tune and thought, okay, what's a really genre appropriate chord progression? 1, 6, 2, 5. Easy peasy. Now the cool thing about this, specifically, we're jumping back to the first bar, that sharp 2 to 3. That's another convention of ragtime and old school jazz, and all jazz really, that kind of chromatic approach up to an appropriate chord tone. So the A is like the targeted chord tone, and the sharp 2 is just kind of pushing up to it. And you can see Koji Kondo use this technique in the later game, Super Mario 64. So Bob on Battlefield, you may recognize as having a similar emotional color to Yoshi's Island in that way. There's a method to, it all seems a little abstract, I know, and I'm not going to say that, oh, Koji Kondo was trying to go for a stoner in an observatory voice, but regardless of how much he thought about it, this is like the effect of what he did, And to me, looking at this, looking at the way he's kind of approached, he's put in all these chords that aren't in the key and are dissonant, but he's approached them all in a very logical way, doing that F to B flat to E flat, so it's a cycle of fourths, doing that kind of E flat to E half diminished, so only one note's moving, and then the E half diminished to A7 to D minor, it makes perfect sense, and then that walking down to G makes perfect sense. It's all these moves that make perfect sense, but no one ever ties them together like Koji Kondo does in this way. And it's like having all of this stuff happen in the key of F is what makes it so cool. Like just having it in the key of D minor or in the key of C, having a D minor over C, G over B wouldn't sound half as interesting. Or I shouldn't say it would have a totally different musical effect. Does that kind of make sense to everyone? Awesome. I'm going to check the time. Okay, we're doing good. Okay, point 3. I've touched on this already, but I find analysis very helpful in composing or playing or improvising or, because it gives you a way to identify chunks or musical ideas that you can just steal and do whatever you want with. So for the rest of the presentation is just a handful of examples. And I think there's something in each of them that's kind of a very obvious characteristic that's really easy to steal and use in your own stuff. So, if that interests you. Oh, why is it so big? That's okay, all right. So, National Park. The first 2 lines of National Park. How many people know this tune? How many people like this tune? More hands went up when I said like. Okay, so, gorgeous, right? Beautiful tune. There's a couple chords that make you go, oh, what's that? The first 4 bars, that G minor, each time it hits, it's just like, oh, wonderful, bittersweet, just, yes, give me more. And so doing a Roman numeral analysis is the 1 minor 4 to 1. You may have heard of this. I played it at the beginning as an example of common chord progressions. This is kind of like, well, for me, this was the first harmonic move that I remember being able to pick out of tunes. Like just listening to a song and then going, oh, that's a minor 4 to 1. And where I learned it was from, oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, whatever that is. There's like a big minor 4 to 1 at the end. And I was like, I remember reading about that in a book and going, oh, that's funny. And then being able to hear it everywhere and going, oh, it's not just in that song. So this is a great cheat as far as I want my tune to sound bittersweet and nostalgic and beautiful. So you experiment with just plugging this in. Sometimes it can sound cheesy, especially if you're used to hearing it everywhere. When someone pulls it out, and you're like, oh, I see what you did there. That's cool. But when it's used tastefully, like in this example, I can listen to it to the song all day. It doesn't get old. So, I'll play it for you here. So 1 to minor 4 to 1 would be like a. But there's a couple interesting things that is happening here. First of all, you'll see that the bass is D flat the whole time. You see, it's a G flat minor over a D flat, not just a straight G flat minor. So it's actually. Okay, that's kind of cool. But then there's something else too. It's not just D flat, it's D flat major 7. And that second G flat minor and the subsequent G flat minors aren't just G flat minors, they're G flat minor 6s. So. You're like, whoa, that's so much more colorful. There's so much more depth to the music. And that's where extensions, can be super interesting to explore. It's just adding like layers of complexity and color on top of chords that without them sound fine, but it's just more of a bare bones kind of sound, to me at least. But so then the other thing that's worth stealing from this tune, because well, I shouldn't say people have stolen it from this tune, because this tune stole it from Japanese pop culture, but this idea of, so the progression I have in brackets is major 4 to minor 4 to 3 to major 6. So I'll play that. That B flat especially is like, why is that here? So this is an interesting example of setting up a resolution and then changing the audience's expectation. Because a major 4 to minor 4 wants to go to 1. And that expectation is set up in the first 4 bars. You get minor 4, 1, minor 4, 1. So, oh, that's like that comes as a surprise, And you get kind of a similar motion from the F minor 7 to the B flat. That's exactly the same thing. Not exactly, but it's almost the exact same thing as we saw in Astral Observatory with the D minor to G. Because that makes sense, that movement on its own makes perfect sense. D minor to G, that sounds so weird now. F minor to D. That's something that you hear a lot. You just don't usually hear it in the key of D flat, right? But so having a weird chord like D flat, set up by that F minor, makes it sound like really cool instead of why that must be a mistake, right? So you get, it's like 2 fake out, well it's 3 fake outs in a row. You get G flat minor, and then a fake out to the F minor. And then the B flat comes as a surprise, because you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting a D natural note in the key of D flat. And then that B flat wants to resolve to an E flat or an E flat minor. Like, listen to this. So yeah. That sounds normal. That sounds right. So going, it doesn't sound quite right, but we started in G flat, the F minor and the B flat, they're the weird ones, okay? The G flat, so it's just interesting, it's like an engine that's generating musical interest by, I don't know how an engine works, I was gonna try and make an analogy. It's like if you're making a sword, if you're a blacksmith, you can't make a sword without beating the crap out of the metal. And so you need a little bit of violence to make something interesting. So this is like, it's jerking you around a little bit, but you love it. And if, the whole thing was just over a D flat static chord, boring, right? But so this idea of like the 3 going to the dominant 6, especially kind of after the 4 chord, it's not used exactly like this, but this idea is used all over J-pop. So like all anime, yeah, you're still on nodding heads. Well, that's another one, like the minor 4 to 1, where as soon as you identify that sound, you'll just hear it everywhere. Oh, okay, that's what they're doing. That's why this whole genre of music sounds like this. Excuse me. Okay, let's move on from this to epitaph. This is a really kind of short example. Well, let's listen to it before I talk about it. I put it in the intro too, so. And we're going to start here. So, this is kind of combining a couple ideas that I've talked about so far. So you're looking for, your eye is drawn to the accidentals, the chromatic notes on the page. G natural in the key of A. That's not supposed to be there. So why would that be there? He's going from an A to an E minor 7 and back. That was what the intro was, just repeating A, E minor 7, A, E minor 7. And it's a very like melancholy kind of thing. It's in a major key. You're in the key of A major and you're sticking close to A, the chord, so you'd think it should sound more happy, but it doesn't. And that's due to the use of the minor 5 chord. So that's a little nugget that you can take for yourself. You can go, oh, okay, minor 5 chord makes the thing sound a little more, like if you know Strawberry Fields by the Beatles. That's that first kind of, let me take you down because I'm going to, where you like drop into like a whole new world of modal harmony. And that's a minor 5 chord. It's the same kind of effect. You're like, whoa, this isn't in a minor key, but it's it feels dark and scary. And then we get our classic minor 4-1, like we had in the last example. But I just love this, like a little 2 chord. You repeat these 2 chords, and it gives you a sound. That's something you can play with. I don't have that much more to say about that. Let's move on. So this is my last example, and this is the hardest, most obtuse example that I have. And this is a really similar idea, because it's just 2 chords that alternate with each other, and it creates a really specific mood. So think about the way the chords are moving and how they make you feel as you listen. So, if we do I'll tell you the thing that is interesting, and you can, this kind of goes back to trying to reverse engineer the logic of the piece. Seeing as how the intro was just 2 chords, no melody, no rhythmic, it's just 2 half-note chords. You can tell, like, the focus is on this kind of harmonic relationship between these 2 chords. And those 2 chords would be the one, I didn't put Roman numerals on, but the idea is the 1 minor tonic chord, and then moving to the flat 2 chord. So I wanted to label the second chord some kind of A chord, right? Because the A is in the bass, and that's kind of the important motion, is having that flat 2 in the bass. But it would end up being like an A6, flat 5 or something, kind of gross looking. So I went with F sharp minor 6 over A. So technically, it's a minor flat 7 chord in first inversion. So there's a lot of stuff to take here. First of all, that altering a minor chord with its flat second note, very dark move. You've heard the song, you know how it sounds. It sounds, melancholy isn't strong enough a word, and it's too overused in music analysis. But yeah, I don't know. I just love stuff like this where you're like, that sounds exactly right. That's exactly how like Midna as a character feels. And I don't know how else to describe it, right? It's like the music is the best way to describe it, is just listening to these 2 chords. But so there's a bunch of stuff to look at. The flat 2, which we talked about. The fact that it's not an A major chord. Because if you're just thinking like, oh, a flat 2 chord, you could go. That's also like dark, and you get a similar effect, but it's not the same.